There are moments when doors close before us, relationships that end without explanation, opportunities that vanish at the last moment, dreams that once seemed solid suddenly evaporating. The natural reaction is to interpret these events as personal failure or even life's punishment. But what if that perspective is nothing more than a limited reading of what is happening on deeper levels? Bruce Lipton shows us that perceptions shape biology. When we interpret an event as rejection, the body is programmed to react with fear, contraction, and vigilance. This repeated chemical response reinforces the belief that something in us is insufficient. Thus, a loss that could have been redirection becomes an internal prison. Gregg Braden offers another vision. Life functions as an intelligent system, similar to a spiritual GPS. When you drift from the most coherent route, life does not punish you. It simply recalculates. Detours, losses, and resistance are not signs that you failed, but indications that there is a more aligned path waiting for your presence. This reframing changes everything. Instead of living each loss as a sentence, we can see it as vibrational adjustment. The field does not close doors out of whim, but to create space where your energy can expand. The invitation of this video is simple and profound. Stop viewing losses as denial and begin recognizing them as vibrational redirection. Because perhaps what you called an ending is in truth life whispering, "This way." When something ends, the human mind tends to immediately interpret it as, "It's over." This reading creates a sense of definitive loss, as if life had taken something away never to return. But in the quantum field, there are no absolute endings. There is only realignment. What looks like a closed door may, in fact, be a change of direction. We can imagine this like the movement of a wave. Before it surges forward with force, the water retreats. To an outside observer, the retreat may look like loss, but it is precisely what gives momentum to the next movement. Life works the same way. Often withdrawal is preparation for a greater arrival. The problem arises when we fixate on the idea of rejection. That thought creates a field of contraction that makes it harder to perceive new openings. Instead of looking around and noticing other routes, we become paralyzed in front of the closed door, insisting that only it could lead us forward. The illusion of the closed door is believing that life is diminishing us. But in truth, the field never closes something without opening another possibility. Retreat, absence, emptiness. These are fertile spaces where the new path begins to form. What is missing is not proof of loss, but an invitation to trust. When we learn to see this movement more clearly, the sense of ending dissolves. We discover that life is not working against us, but for us, even when it asks us to walk roads we do not yet recognize. Resistance is one of the most misinterpreted signs of life. We tend to see it as punishment or rejection, but in truth, it is a form of communication. The field does not speak in words, it speaks through flows and friction. When something resists fitting in, it may simply be life showing that another alignment is required. We can use the metaphor of friction between two surfaces. When two materials rub, heat arises. That heat is not punishment, but the natural consequence of movement. Likewise, resistance generates discomfort, not to punish, but to release energy for change. It is an invitation to step out of autopilot and reconsider direction and posture. In daily life, this shows up in simple ways. A relationship that persistently drains, a project that refuses to move despite effort, a body that repeatedly falls ill in response to certain patterns. Each resistance is a vibrational signal of misalignment, showing where we insist on staying in what no longer sustains our energy. The challenge is to stop fighting resistance and start listening to it. Instead of asking, "Why doesn't this work for me?" the question can shift to, "What is this difficulty trying to show me?" Friction stops being enemy and becomes compass. When we understand resistance as the language of the field, it loses the weight of failure and gains the value of guidance. What once looked like blockage reveals itself as an arrow, directing energy to where life wants you to flourish more fully. There are moments when it feels like nothing works. Relationships fall apart, plans stall, efforts bear no fruit. In such times, the mind rushes to conclude, everything is going wrong. But from the quantum perspective, that void may not be failure, but a threshold. The exact point where an old timeline dissolves so that another may emerge. The old identity, with its beliefs and habits, cannot sustain the frequency that is being born. It is like trying to carry water in a cracked vessel. No matter how much effort you put in, it always leaks out. What is lost in that moment is not punishment, but the natural consequence of vibrational incompatibility between who you were and who you are becoming. This threshold is uncomfortable because it demands crossing into the unknown. There is no proof of the new yet, but there is no longer support in the old either. It is like walking across a bridge of mist. The feet cannot see where to step, yet they must move forward. The secret lies in recognizing that the void is passage, not condemnation. The absence of results is only the open space where the new can collapse into being. If the body remains in trust, the field responds with clarity little by little, as if revealing the map one step at a time. When we see these periods as thresholds between timelines, despair transforms into reverence. What once seemed like life's absolute silence becomes understood as a sacred interval of preparation, where identity reorganizes itself before the next leap. When something doesn't happen the way you expected, the first reaction is to think of rejection. I didn't succeed because I don't deserve it. I was discarded. Life is against me. This perspective fills the body with guilt and frustration, creating even more contraction. But what if, instead of rejection, each no were actually redirection? The intelligent field does not operate on a logic of punishment. It reorganizes energy according to what is compatible with your frequency in the moment. If something moves away, it may simply be because it no longer resonates with who you are becoming. Life does not take away out of cruelty, it removes to make room. The key question, then, is not why did I lose, but what is being released to make space for the new. This shift in perspective transforms the pain of loss from dead weight into a sign of purification. You were not rejected, you were realigned. Pain in this process needs to be honored. The emptiness left by a closed door should not be denied. It is natural to feel sadness, grief, or confusion. But instead of fixating on what is missing, you can view grief as part of a purification ritual, a cleansing of the field so that another frequency can find its place. When you embrace this perspective, even the no becomes an ally. It stops meaning exclusion and starts meaning opening. Each apparent rejection is a silent reorganization, preparing the stage for a version of you that is still being born. In quantum physics, there is a phenomenon called decoherence, when a particle stops sustaining multiple possibilities and collapses into a fixed form. Something similar happens to us. Our crystallized beliefs and habits act like rigid patterns, repeating the same reality because they don't allow space for new frequencies. When you raise your vibration through practices, new choices, or simply an inner awakening, those old patterns begin to lose coherence. What once felt solid and unquestionable starts to dissolve. That dissolution, though uncomfortable, is actually a sign of expansion. It is at this point that the sensation of chaos emerges. Familiar structures crumble, relationships dissolve, routines lose meaning. But instead of interpreting this as failure, it's essential to understand that the old identity can no longer sustain the new frequency. You are literally crossing a quantum transition of yourself. This process requires trust, so you don't run back to the old. The temptation is to cling to what was, even if tight or painful, just to feel safe. But if you allow decoherence to run its course, you will discover that dissolution is only the prelude to reorganization at a higher level. Just as particles find new configurations when they release old forms, we also access new realities when we let go of rigid identities. What dissolves is not loss, it is space being freed so that consciousness can create new pathways of existence. Friction, as uncomfortable as it may be, is one of the field's most precise languages. It shows up as unease, repetition of exhausting patterns, feelings of impatience or heaviness in the body. For the mind, it's easy to see it as a sign of error or punishment. But in essence, friction is information. It shows exactly where we are still carrying stories that no longer fit who we've become. We can imagine it as the polishing of a stone. Friction does not destroy the stone, it reveals its sharper form. The same happens with us. Every discomfort highlights where there is something to be released, refining consciousness until it shines with greater clarity. The field reflects our insistences. When we keep old narratives, I am not enough. I will always be rejected. I can't change. Life creates scenarios that rub against those beliefs, not as punishment, but as a reminder that it's time to let go of the old story. The secret lies in changing our stance toward friction. Instead of fighting it or trying to silence the pain, we can ask, what is this discomfort trying to show me? This listening transforms resistance into compass, allowing discomfort to guide the next step of expansion. When we recognize the intelligence of friction, we stop running from pain and begin to honor it as part of the process. Discomfort stops being a sign of failure and becomes a sacred part of the soul's refinement, a reminder that life does not break us, but tunes us. The collapse of something that once felt solid hurts. It may be the loss of a relationship, the failure of a project, the sudden change of plans. The mind usually interprets it as an ending, as if life had taken away something essential. But in many cases, this unraveling is not destruction, it is initiation. The old must be dismantled so the new can be built. This process is sacred because it invites us to move through grief with presence. It is not about denying pain or rushing to fill it with distractions. Grief is a necessary space to honor what has been, allowing its energy to be released instead of imprisoned as weight. We can imagine it as the pruning of a tree. The cut looks violent, but in truth it is preparation for broader blossoming. The branch that goes makes room for the sap to reorganize and nourish new buds. The same happens in our lives. Dismantling creates fertile ground. Making room for grief is essential for reorganization to happen in a healthy way. When we try to suppress or rush pain, it becomes rigidity, keeping us stuck in what should already have been released. Honoring the tears, the silence, the longing is part of the purification process. Sacred unraveling reminds us that endings are not punishment, but preparation. What collapses does not steal your worth, it only clears the ground. And in that cleared ground, life finds space to plant something that resonates with the frequency you are now learning to sustain. When we face losses or unexpected changes, the first to react is the body. Nervousness, anxiety, racing heart, insomnia, all of these signals are physiological responses to the unknown. We often interpret them as enemies, trying to silence them by force. But in truth, the body is only translating into physical language what the soul has already perceived. We are crossing a threshold of transformation. Bruce Lipton reminds us that perceptions shape biology. When we interpret an event as a threat, the body releases defensive chemistry, cortisol, adrenaline, preparing to fight or flee. But if we look at the same event as an opportunity for realignment, the body reorganizes its chemistry towards states of trust and expansion. That is why learning to listen to the body is essential. Instead of fighting symptoms, we can welcome them as messages. Anxiety, for example, may simply be showing that we are trying to carry the old into a space where only the new fits. The body does not lie, it reveals where we are still resisting. A simple practice can help in this process. Place one hand over your heart and the other over your belly. Breathe slowly, feeling the body relax with each exhalation. This gesture communicates to the nervous system that safety is present, even in the face of the unknown. Little by little, biology aligns with the new perception. When we use the body as interpreter, transformation stops being only mental and becomes embodied. It turns into a bridge between the invisible and the visible, reminding us that every sensation is part of a larger dialogue between us and the field. In the midst of chaos, the mind wants to rush after immediate answers. But presence invites us to another path, to pause, breathe, and turn silence into a meeting point with the field. This ritual requires nothing but yourself, willing to be whole in the moment. Breath is the simplest and most powerful tool for this realignment. Inhaling deeply, holding for a few moments, and exhaling slowly communicates to the body that there is no immediate threat. The nervous system deactivates its alert mode, and consciousness finds space to expand. This silence is not emptiness, it is fertile field. It is within it that noise dissolves and new possibilities begin to be perceived. When you breathe with attention, you not only calm the mind, you tune the body to frequencies of trust and openness. Turning this into ritual means creating small intervals of realignment in daily life. 3 minutes of conscious breathing can change the tone of an entire day. The secret lies in consistency, repeating until the body learns to associate presence with safety. The ritual of presence reminds us that we do not need to wait for the next external proof. The meeting point with the field is always accessible, in the silence between one breath and the next. It is there that life reorganizes routes and brings us back to center. Life's friction can at first seem like an enemy. Setbacks, tense relationships, frustrated plans. But when seen clearly, it is a point of orientation. Each resistance shows not only what no longer works, but what is asking to be born within us. The key lies in changing the question. Instead of "why is the world against me?" we can ask, "what in me is being called to expand?" This shift in perspective transforms friction into compass, pointing to the next step of the evolutionary process. Every no we receive from the outer world hides an inner yes. When one door does not open, another part of us is being invited to awaken. Life never says no in absolute terms. It only redirects us toward the frequency we are ready to sustain. Trusting this process does not mean denying pain, but using it as a guide. The sooner we recognize friction as signal, the less we need greater shocks to realign. Trust is born from realizing that even discomfort is part of life's intelligent design. Transforming friction into trust is the movement that converts resistance into expansion. At this point, life stops being a battlefield and reveals itself as a field of orientation, and every tension becomes proof that you are in the process of being reborn into your truest frequency. Looking back, we realize that the doors that closed were not punishments, but realignments. Every loss, every resistance, every silence of the field served to reposition us into a truer frequency. What seemed like an ending was, in fact, preparation for a new beginning. Bruce Lipton reminds us that our emotions and perceptions reprogram the body. When we interpret events as rejection, our cells record fear. But when we see each experience as part of an intelligent adjustment, biology responds with openness, creating space for new possibilities to manifest. Joe Dispenza shows that when mind and heart enter coherence, the field responds with synchronicities. We do not need to force results, we need to cultivate states. The external reality is only a reflection of the vibrational signature we sustain within. The invitation then is simple. Stop measuring the path by immediate results and start feeling each resistance as proof of expansion. Friction ceases to be obstacle and becomes sign that the new is trying to stabilize. The field never says no, it only whispers, "this way." And if you have the courage to listen, you will discover that even loss is part of the route leading you back to yourself.